The summer of 1968 brought scorching heat to Long Beach, California, and the International Karate Championship had transformed the municipal auditorium into a cauldron of sweat, adrenaline, and anticipation. The smell of canvas mats, athletic tape, and nervous perspiration filled the air. Hundreds of spectators packed the bleachers, their voices creating a constant hum that echoed off the concrete walls. Bruce Lee stood at the edge of the demonstration area, watching the competitors with those intense dark eyes that seemed to absorb everything. If you want to discover what happened when two martial arts legends met for the first time, and why this encounter led to the most iconic fight scene in cinema history, stay until the end. You won't regret it. He had been invited by Ed Parker, the legendary Kenpo master who organized this tournament every year. Bruce wasn't here to compete. He was here to demonstrate something different. Something that made the traditional martial artists in the crowd shift uncomfortably in their seats. Across the auditorium, a man in a crisp white GI accepted a trophy to thunderous applause. Chuck Norris had just defended his middleweight championship for the third consecutive year, extending his remarkable record to 168 victories. At 5 feet 10 inches and 170 pounds of disciplined muscle, he represented everything the traditional martial arts world valued. Perfect form, flawless technique, years of dedication to the ancient ways of Tang Soo Do. His spinning back kick had become legendary in competition circles, a technique so devastating that opponents often conceded the moment they saw him chamber it. He had trained under the greatest Korean masters, had bled and sweated through thousands of hours of practice to achieve technical perfection. Chuck's eyes found Bruce Lee through the crowd. He had watched the demonstration earlier, had seen this compact Chinese man move in ways that defied categorization. No recognizable stances, no traditional forms, just fluid, almost formless movement that seemed to mock the very foundations of classical training. It was impressive, certainly, but it troubled him deeply. Ed Parker appeared beside Chuck, still holding his clipboard from the judging table. "What did you think of Lee's demonstration?" Chuck considered the question carefully. He was not a man given to hasty judgments. Impressive showmanship, but I couldn't identify his system. Where's the structure? Where are the forms? Ed smiled knowingly. "That's exactly why I want you to meet. Come with me." They found Bruce near the back entrance, speaking quietly with a small group of students. He turned as they approached, and Chuck felt the weight of those eyes measuring him with an intensity that matched his own. "Bruce, this is Chuck Norris, world middleweight champion." "Chuck, Bruce Lee." Bruce extended his hand, his grip firm but not aggressive. "Congratulations on your victory. Your spinning back kick in the finals was exceptional. Perfect rotation, maximum power at point of impact." Chuck nodded, surprised by the technical precision of the compliment. "Thank you. Your demonstration was interesting. I've never seen anything quite like it." "Interesting." Bruce smiled slightly. "That's a careful word. I mean no disrespect," Chuck said, his voice measured. "But I couldn't identify your style. What system do you practice?" "No system, no style, just the way." Chuck's brow furrowed. He had spent 15 years mastering the traditional forms, perfecting each movement until they became part of his very being. The idea of formlessness contradicted everything he had been taught. Without forms, how do you teach? Without structure, how can there be discipline? Bruce's eyes sparkled with something between amusement and genuine interest. "Forms can be a cage, Chuck. They protect you, but they also imprison you. They teach you one response to each situation. What happens when the situation doesn't match the form?" "My forms made me champion," Chuck replied, a hint of steel entering his voice. "In tournaments? Within rules. But what about when there are no rules? What happens when your opponent hasn't read the same manual?" The words hung between them like a challenge. Ed Parker glanced nervously from one man to the other. These were two of the most skilled martial artists in America, and the tension was building toward something inevitable. "Show me," Chuck said quietly. "Show me what you do when there are no rules." Bruce held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Ed, is the back room available?" "The warm-up area. It's empty now." The three men walked through a service corridor, their footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. The warm-up room was small, perhaps 20 feet square, with a single practice mat covering the center. A bare fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the space. The smell of old sweat and canvas permeated the room. The muffled roar of the crowd in the main auditorium seemed to come from another world entirely. Here, in this small space, two different philosophies of combat were about to collide. Chuck moved to one side of the mat and assumed his fighting stance. It was a thing of beauty, honed by countless hours of practice. Weight perfectly distributed, hands positioned exactly as his masters had taught him. Every angle calculated for maximum efficiency within the classical framework. Bruce walked to the opposite side and simply stood there, relaxed, almost casual. His hands hung loosely at his sides, his weight shifting subtly like water, finding its level. "You're not ready," Chuck observed. "I'm always ready. The question is, what are you ready for?" Chuck attacked. A textbook front kick, executed with championship precision. Bruce wasn't there. Not dramatically dodging, not leaping away. He simply occupied different space, as if he had known where the kick would land before Chuck's muscles had even fired. Chuck followed with a reverse punch, then a spinning back fist. Each technique was perfect, the product of years of dedicated training. Each one found empty air. Bruce moved through the assault like smoke, never quite where the strikes arrived, always a fraction of a second ahead. Growing frustrated, Chuck launched his signature technique, the spinning back kick that had defeated countless opponents, that had earned him championship after championship. It was fast, powerful, and virtually unstoppable. In competition, opponents had learned to fear the moment Chuck shifted his weight for this technique. Many had been knocked unconscious. Others had simply surrendered, rather than face it. Bruce didn't try to block it, didn't try to catch it. Instead, he stepped forward at an angle that no traditional defense would suggest, slipping past the kick's arc and ending up behind Chuck. Before the champion could complete his rotation, he felt a hand resting gently against the back of his neck and another pressing lightly against his kidney. In a tournament, that kick scores points, Bruce said quietly. In reality, this position ends the fight. The rules that make your technique effective also limit your vision of what's possible. Chuck stood frozen, processing what had just happened. In 15 years of competition and training, no one had ever neutralized his spinning kick so completely. Not by being faster or stronger, but by simply not playing the same game. Chuck paused, searching for words. That wasn't any defense I've ever seen, because I wasn't defending. Defense assumes you accept the opponent's framework. I simply moved to where your technique has no meaning. They separated, returning to their positions on the mat. Ed Parker watched in silence, knowing he was witnessing something significant. Again, Chuck said, "Show me more." For the next 30 minutes, Bruce demonstrated a different philosophy of combat. He showed how the same attack could be answered 5 different ways, each one flowing naturally from the movement itself rather than from memorized responses. He showed how structure could become limitation, how the predictability of perfect form could be exploited by someone who refused to follow the expected patterns. Your forms teach you to fight other martial artists, Bruce explained. People who move the way you expect, who attack from angles your system anticipates. But what about the street fighter who has never seen a dojo? What about the wrestler who shoots for your legs? What about the boxer who doesn't care about your stances? Chuck listened, his worldview shifting with each demonstration. He had always believed that perfection of form was the ultimate goal. Now he was beginning to see that form was only one path among many. Bruce positioned himself in front of Ed Parker. "Hold the pad for me." Ed took a striking pad and braced it against his chest. Bruce stepped so close that his extended fist barely touched the leather surface. 1 inch of distance, maybe less. "What is this?" Chuck asked, moving closer to observe. "Watch." The movement was almost invisible. A small compression of Bruce's body, a wave of energy traveling from his feet through his hips and into his fist. The sound was sharp, explosive. Ed Parker, a large man who had absorbed thousands of strikes in his career, stumbled backward 3 feet. "How?" Chuck's voice was barely a whisper. "There's no wind-up, no chamber. Nothing in any form I know generates power like that." "Because it's not a form," Bruce replied. "It's a principle. The form teaches you to pull back before you strike, to load your weapon before firing. But that loading is a telegraph. It announces your intention. What if the power could come from stillness, from perfect efficiency rather than maximum motion? Be water, my friend. Water doesn't wind up before it crashes against the shore. It simply releases its energy in the moment of impact. Chuck stared at his own fists, tools he had trained for 15 years to use in very specific ways. He had never questioned the fundamental assumptions of his training. Pull back to punch, chamber to kick, load to strike. What Bruce was showing him wasn't just a different technique, it was a different way of thinking about combat entirely. The room fell silent except for the distant sounds of the tournament continuing without them. Finally, Chuck spoke. "I've spent my whole life believing there was one correct path, the right forms, the right techniques, perfected through repetition, until they become instinct." He looked up at Bruce. "You're telling me the path itself is the limitation?" "The path has value," Bruce said. "Your dedication, your discipline, your precision, these are real. But the path is not the destination. It's just one way of walking." Chuck nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. Not defeat, recognition. The recognition of a man who had just discovered that the mountain he thought he had climbed was merely a foothill, and vast ranges still lay ahead. "I want to work with you. Not to abandon what I've learned, but to understand what else is possible." Bruce smiled, and for the first time it carried genuine warmth. "And I want to learn from you. Your spinning kick is the best I've ever seen. Nobody generates that kind of rotational power with such control. The way you chamber, the way you release, it's poetry in motion. Teach me that, and I'll teach you what I know." It was Ed Parker who broke the moment with a laugh. "I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've never seen two champions decide to become each other's students." Chuck extended his hand, and Bruce clasped it firmly. "Not students," Chuck said. "Partners, explorers." In the years that followed, their friendship would reshape both men's understanding of martial arts. They trained together regularly, each absorbing what the other had to offer. Chuck incorporated Bruce's principles of economy and formlessness into his approach, while Bruce refined his kicking techniques with Chuck's expertise. Then came 1972, and the filming of Way of the Dragon. Bruce had written a fight scene specifically for Chuck, set in the Roman Colosseum. It would become the most celebrated martial arts sequence in cinema history. A 9-minute battle that showcased everything both men had learned from each other. During filming, they threw real strikes, real kicks, each man pushing the other to perform beyond what either could have achieved alone. The scene captured their real relationship to warriors who respected each other enough to hold nothing back. "That wasn't acting," Chuck would say in interviews decades later. "That was to martial artists having a real conversation, just with fists and feet instead of words. Every technique you see in that scene, we actually threw at each other. The only thing fake was the ending." After Bruce's tragic death in 1973, Chuck became one of the most vocal advocates for his legacy. He spoke of that first meeting in Long Beach, whenever asked, always emphasizing the same lesson. The greatest martial artists are those who never stop questioning, never stop learning, never believe they have found the final answer. The lesson of that summer afternoon transcends martial arts. It speaks to anyone trapped by their own expertise, limited by the very mastery they've worked so hard to achieve. True wisdom lies not in perfecting one path, but in understanding that all paths are ultimately fingers pointing. At the same moon, if this story inspired you and made you think differently about the balance between tradition and innovation, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who needs to understand that the greatest masters are those who remain eternal students. Comment below, tradition or revolution, which matters more?